So this is my presentation on Native American stereotypes in the media. So the term Indian giver is meant to mean someone who takes something back or expects something in return. And Annette Funicello was a singer who had a song called Indian Giver that was about a man who takes his heart back. This is an example of singing red face because it relies on racial stereotypes to get the message across. And then the album cover also used aspects of Native American culture in the imagery as well. And then further, the song also had words in it that have negative connotations today. The noble savage is one example of stereotypes that you see in the media. They're often envied by Western society because they're viewed as very free. One example of this is summer camps that kind of structure themselves around Native American culture. Examples of this are using face paint or headdresses. And this is an example of cultural misappropriation because they're kind of stealing from another culture that's not theirs and not doing it in a respectful way. This stereotype leads to idealized sympathy, which is where these caricatures are sympathetic, but they're still not accurate portrayals of Native Americans. So in children's media, you also see a lot of negative stereotypes about Native Americans. One example of this is the Cowboys and Indians game that little kids play. This is often characterizes Native Americans as the villains. And then you also have cartoons like Peter Pan and Looney Tunes that utilize negative Native American portrayals. So the brutal savage is the other stereotype that you see a lot. These view the Native Americans as enemies, and they're often characterized as very bloodthirsty and uncivilized, and often in the way of the progression of Western society. So you don't often see Native American women represented in films, but when you do, it's often the character of the Indian princess. They're often characterized as mythological and romantic, and a prime example of this is in the Disney film Pocahontas, who is shown to have a whirlwind romance with John Smith, when in actuality, she was probably around 9 years old when this happened, which is extremely inaccurate. And then you also have American Western films, and then the cowboys in these films are always the hero while the Native Americans are the bad guys. These portrayals are very one-dimensional, and they kind of lead to racial antipathy, which is where these stereotypes kind of add on and lead to an extreme dislike of Native Americans. So red face is utilized in a lot of these American films. And this is when white actors will play Native American roles, and they'll use paint and costumes. One example of this was Iron Eyes Cody, who's one of the biggest actors who played Native American roles. He was actually white and would paint his skin to kind of fit the role. So a result of all these stereotypes in the media is people believing that Native Americans are kind of a singular culture, when in actuality, different tribes have very different customs. Horses are kind of viewed as the integral part of Native American culture, when most tribes didn't use horses. And then another aspect is headbands. That you often see in these films. This isn't really an accurate portrayal, and they were only really used to secure the wigs on the actors' heads. So in the 70s, there was an occupation at Wounded Knee that was a standoff between the Native Americans and the FBI. And this resulted in Marlon Brando and Sachin Littlefoot coming together at the Academy Awards to bring attention to negative stereotypes against Native Americans, as well as the occupation at Wounded Knee. So in conclusion, these stereotypes that you see in the media and in music can be very harmful in real life. And this kind of results in cultural confusion, which is where all these inaccurate portrayals and misinformation kind of leads to people not having a good understanding of what Native American culture actually is. And this really proves why accurate representation is really important. And here's a list of my references. Thank you.